The key turned in the lock with a familiar, grating sound, one I hadn't heard in years but that my muscles remembered instantly. The air that rolled out to meet me was the same, too. It was the unique scent of my childhood home, a mix of old wood, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, and the faint, phantom trace of my mom's lavender potpourri. For a second, it felt like I was 13 again, coming home from school. But the silence that followed was a stark reminder that no one was here to ask about my day. The move to the assisted living facility had been hard on them, but necessary. And it had left me with this, a house full of ghosts and furniture, and the weekend-long task of deciding which to keep. I dropped my duffel bag by the door. "All right," I said to the empty foyer, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Let's get this over with." The living room felt smaller. The carpet was faded where the big floral sofa used to be, a pale rectangle of what was. I ran my hand along the doorframe leading to the kitchen, my fingers finding the series of pencil marks that had tracked my growth. Nate, age 8, Nate, age 10. The highest mark was from when I was 16, just before I got my driver's license and stopped caring about such things. It's funny, the things you forget. You think you'll remember the big moments, but it's the little stuff, like the feel of mom's pencil pressing against the top of your head, that really sticks with you. I knew the worst of it would be in the attic. That was the Bermuda Triangle of our house, where everything went to be forgotten but never truly thrown away. The pull-down ladder groaned in protest as I unfolded it. A wave of thick, baked heat washed over me as the attic entrance opened, smelling of ancient paper and sun-cooked insulation. I climbed up, my head emerging into the stifling, dimly lit space. It was exactly as I'd left it, a chaotic landscape of cardboard boxes, old suitcases, and furniture draped in white sheets, looking like a congregation of lumpy ghosts. My plan was simple: start a keep pile, a donate pile, and a trash pile. The reality was, well, a lot sweatier. 30 minutes in, my t-shirt was stuck to my back, and dust clung to my eyelashes. I was sorting through a box of my old high school yearbooks and baseball trophies when I saw it, tucked away behind a broken floor fan. It was a large, unassuming cardboard box, sealed with yellowed packing tape. On the side, in my mom's neat, slightly slanted cursive, it just said, "Memories." I had to use my car key to slice through the tape. Inside, nestled in a mess of old cables, was a VCR. A real beast of a machine, heavy and black. And underneath it, a stack of about 20 VHS tapes, each one labeled in that same familiar handwriting. Christmas, '96. Beach trip, summer, '99. Nate's first steps. A genuine smile spread across my face for the first time that day. It was a tangible piece of them, of us. A time capsule. The heat and the dust and the loneliness of the house seemed to recede for a moment. I had to see what was on them. The attic could wait. I hauled the box downstairs, my arms aching. The old console TV was still in the living room, a relic nobody had bothered to move. I wasn't sure it would even work. But after a few minutes of fumbling with the coaxial cable and a bit of guesswork, the screen flickered to life with a blast of static. The VCR whirred when I plugged it in, its little green clock flashing a hopeful 12 o'clock. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like I used to when I was a kid, and looked through the tapes. My fingers paused on one. The label was slightly faded, the ink a little blurry. Nate's 5th birthday 1995. That was a good one. I remembered bits and pieces of it. The G.I. Joe-themed cake, the magician my dad hired who kept messing up his tricks. It felt safe, a perfect antidote to the quiet emptiness of the house. I pushed the tape into the slot. The machine groaned, sucked it in with a loud clunk, and the static on the screen dissolved. The picture that appeared was grainy, the colors oversaturated in that distinct 90s camcorder way. The audio was muffled, a cacophony of kids yelling and adults laughing. There was my mom, her hair bigger and her face so much younger, carrying a cake with 5 lit candles. There was Dad, a goofy grin on his face, holding the camera and narrating. "Okay, big guy, make a wish. Make a wish." I watched myself, a little kid with a bowl cut and a missing front tooth, his eyes wide with excitement. I saw him take a huge breath and blow out the candles to a round of applause. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was good. This was why I was here, to save these little moments from being thrown away. The camera was shaky. My dad was clearly not a professional videographer. He panned across the room, capturing my friends digging into the cake, my grandparents sitting on the sofa, my aunt waving from the kitchen. It was all so normal, so wonderfully, boringly normal. Then, he panned towards the front door, and my heart stopped. For just a moment, standing in the archway that led from the living room to the front hall, there was a man. My dad's camera work was clumsy. He was already moving on, focusing back on me unwrapping a present. But I'd seen him. I grabbed the remote, my hand suddenly slick with sweat. I hit rewind. The tape squealed in protest. Then I hit play. There it was again, the pan across the room. The grandparents, the aunt, the archway. Pause. He was just standing there. A man in his early 30s, wearing clothes that were completely out of place for 1995. He was wearing a dark gray Henley shirt and jeans. My clothes. The kind of thing I wear every day. His hair was cut short, just like mine. He wasn't smiling or interacting with anyone. He was just there, motionless, and he was looking directly at the camera. What the hell? I whispered, the sound swallowed by the silence of the room. It had to be a cousin, right? Or a family friend I'd forgotten. Someone who just happened to look familiar. But the clothes were wrong. Everything about him felt wrong. Anachronistic. My finger found the zoom button on the remote, a function I didn't even know this old thing had. The image pixelated, blowing up into a mess of colored squares, but it was enough. The face became clearer. It was a face I shaved every morning. My face. It was me, not a younger version, not a relative. It was me, Nate, age 32, standing in the doorway of my own 5th birthday party 27 years in the past. The feeling wasn't fear, not yet. It was a deep, profound, stomach-twisting confusion. A logical impossibility playing out on a grainy television screen. I tried to rationalize it. A glitch in the tape? A bizarre double exposure? Maybe my dad had accidentally taped over something else, and this was just a weird, coincidental flicker of an image. But it wasn't a flicker. As I held the pause button down, the image was solid. Unmoving. The worst part was the expression. There was no joy, no curiosity. It was a blank, hollow stare. The eyes were completely devoid of emotion, like two dark, empty windows. It wasn't the look of a guest. It was the look of something that didn't belong, an observer watching a scene it had no part in, and it made a cold dread, sharp and icy, crawl up my spine. I let go of the pause button and watched the scene play out. The camera pans away from the man in the doorway, from me, and focuses back on the birthday boy. No one else seems to notice him. No one looks over. The party continues, full of laughter and light. But now it was all tainted. The happy memory was corrupted, violated by this silent, impossible spectator. I sat there on the floor, the cheerful, muffled sounds of the past echoing in the dead silence of the present. I rewound the tape, and I played it again. The pan, the grandparents, the aunt, the archway, the man who was me. Again, the pan, the face, the empty eyes. Again, he was still there. He never moved, a ghost from my future, haunting my past. I couldn't look away from the screen. My own face stared back at me from across a quarter century, a silent sentinel in the doorway of my life, his expression holding a terrifying emptiness that I couldn't begin to understand. I was looking at something that could not be real, and yet, there it was. There I was, and for the first time since I'd walked through the front door, the house didn't feel safe at all. It felt like I wasn't alone. My hands were shaking, I mean, actually shaking. I put the remote down on the worn oriental rug, the plastic making a soft clack against the floor. I watched my own fingers tremble against the faded red and blue patterns. It wasn't real, it couldn't be. The mind is a powerful thing, right? It plays tricks. I'd been alone in this big, quiet house all day, stirring up old feelings, breathing in dust. I was tired, probably dehydrated. My brain had simply seen a blurry shape in a doorway and, searching for a pattern, had superimposed my own face onto it. Pareidolia, that was the word for it, seeing faces in clouds or burnt toast. This was just video pareidolia. Yeah, that had to be it. I pushed myself up off the floor, my knees cracking in protest. My legs felt stiff, unsteady. I walked into the kitchen, the linoleum cool against my bare feet. The motion felt good, deliberate. I was in control. I opened the familiar squeaky cupboard, grabbed a glass, the same kind of thick, heavy glass we'd used my entire life, and filled it from the tap. I drank it all in one go, the cold water a shock to my system. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes, and focused on the sound of the refrigerator's low hum. Normal sounds, a normal house, an old tape, a glitch, a trick of the light and a tired mind. That's all it was. I told myself that over and over again. I stayed in the kitchen for a few minutes, just breathing. But the thing is, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The blankness of those eyes. My eyes. It wasn't just a face, it was an expression. Or, more accurately, a complete lack of one. It was the soulless, vacant look of a mannequin, and it had been looking right at the camera. Right at my dad, right at me. Now, decades later, the pull to go back into the living room was stronger than the fear. It was a morbid, terrifying curiosity, like the urge to touch a hot stove just to see if it's really on. I needed to prove myself wrong. I needed to see something normal, to wash the bad taste of that video out of my mouth. A single, isolated incident. A fluke. I walked back into the living room. The TV screen was still paused on the image of my 5-year-old self, beaming, holding a newly unwrapped G.I. Joe. Behind him, out of focus, the doorway was empty because the camera had panned away. It looked so innocent now. I hit the stop button, and the VCR whirred before spitting the tape out with a decisive thud. I picked up the ejected cassette, Nate's 5th birthday, and set it aside deliberately. One bad apple. I sifted through the pile of other tapes on the floor. My hands hovered over Christmas, '96, but that felt too similar. Same house, same rooms. No, I needed something completely different. A new setting. My eyes landed on one. Beach trip, summer, '99. Perfect. It was an annual family pilgrimage to the coast. It would be bright, sunny, open, and full of strangers. There were no shadowy doorways on a crowded beach. This would be the antidote. This would prove it was all in my head. My heart was still beating a little too fast, a frantic drum against my ribs, as I pushed the new tape into the VCR. The machine swallowed it, and after a moment of static, the screen filled with a blast of sunlight and the sound of crashing waves. The quality was just as bad, maybe worse. The sun bleached out half the picture, and the wind distorted the audio. But it was us. There was Dad, younger, thinner, wearing a ridiculous floppy hat and pointing the camera at a sandcastle. That's some fine engineering, son, he boomed over the wind. There was Mom, slathering sunscreen on my 10-year-old arms while I squirmed. I looked lanky and awkward, all knees and elbows, my hair bleached blonde by the sun. I watched us for a few minutes, the knot in my stomach slowly beginning to loosen. This was good. This was normal. Just happy, blurry memories. There were no mysterious figures, no weird glitches. I saw my dad pan across the beach, a sea of families on towels, kids splashing in the surf, teenagers throwing a frisbee. It was a chaotic, cheerful tapestry of a perfect summer day. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I felt foolish. Of course there was nothing here. I'd let myself get completely spooked by a dusty old tape and an overactive imagination. I was about to just let the tape play out, my little experiment a success, when Dad did one of his signature clumsy pans. He was trying to follow a seagull that had stolen someone's potato chip, swinging the camera wildly to the left, away from the ocean and towards the dunes and the small, shaded boardwalk area set back from the sand. The camera swung past a cluster of sea grape trees, their thick leaves providing a patch of deep shade. And that's when I saw him. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It was for less than a second, a handful of frames, but it was enough. I fumbled for the remote, my fingers feeling like fat, clumsy sausages. I hit rewind, the tape shrieking. Play. The camera whipped past again. Too fast. Rewind. Play. A little slower, my thumb hovering over the pause button. There. Pause. My breath hitched in my throat. Standing in the deep shade of the trees, where the harsh sunlight couldn't reach, was the man. Same dark gray Henley, same jeans, same haircut, same me. He was just standing there, partially obscured by a thick branch, while the happy life of the beach went on around him, completely oblivious. And just like before, he wasn't looking at the ocean, or the people, or the sky. He was staring directly into the camera lens. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a coincidence. This was impossible. 2 different tapes, filmed 4 years apart, in 2 completely different locations. And he was in both of them. A silent, unmoving spectator to my childhood. I didn't move. I just stared at the frozen image on the screen, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The figure on the beach was clearer than the one in the doorway. Maybe it was the light, or maybe the camera had focused on him for just a fraction of a second longer. His face was unmistakable. It was my face, but the expression was the same hollow, dead-eyed stare. He looked like someone who had seen the end of the world and just didn't care anymore. Then, a new, colder, and far more terrible thought began to form in the back of my mind. It started as a faint whisper of dread. I ejected the beach tape and, with a trembling hand, slid the birthday party tape back in. I fast-forwarded to the moment. The pan, the grandparents, the aunt, the archway. Pause. I leaned so close to the TV that my breath fogged the screen. I was studying the figure in the doorway, his position, his size relative to the doorframe. Then I ejected it again, the mechanical noise an affront to the suffocating silence, and slammed the beach tape back in. I found the frame again, the man under the trees. Pause. I tried to compare them, my mind racing. In the birthday video, he was in the archway, maybe 20-25 feet from the camera. Here, on the beach, he was further away in real-world terms, standing back by the boardwalk. But the way he filled the frame, the way the camera saw him. I scrambled for a pen and a napkin from the coffee table. I held the napkin up to the screen, to the figure in the doorway on the first tape, and marked his height from head to toe with the pen. A crude measurement, I know, it sounds insane, but I had to know. I swapped the tapes one more time. The clicks and whirs of the VCR sounded like a ticking bomb. I found the man under the tree. I held the napkin up to the screen again. My heart hammered against my chest so hard I thought it would break. The figure on the beach tape was bigger. Not by a lot, just a fraction of an inch on a piece of paper held up to a 20-year-old television. But it was undeniable. The camera was further away, but he appeared larger in the frame. The only way that was possible was if he had moved closer. Not in the real world of the beach, but closer to the point of recording. Closer through time. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just a static observer. He wasn't a ghost fixed in one place. This was a pursuit, a slow, patient, relentless pursuit across the moments of my life. The warmth of my memories was gone, replaced by the chilling realization that they were just crime scenes, evidence of a stalker who defied all logic. My entire life, he'd been there, just at the edge of the frame, watching. And with every passing moment, he was getting closer. I threw the remote down on the sofa. It bounced off a cushion and clattered to the floor. The napkin fell from my numb fingers. My throat was tight. I couldn't breathe. The happy, sun-drenched beach on the screen was no longer a memory, it was a threat. The quiet, empty house was no longer a sanctuary, it was a cage. I was a child in those videos, happy and unaware. But I wasn't a child anymore. A new thought, sharp and terrifying, cut through the fog of my panic. He's not just in the past. He's not just watching. He's coming. And at that exact moment, from the hallway just outside the living room, I heard it. A faint creak. The sound of a single, deliberate footstep on the old hardwood floor. The sound of weight settling on the exact spot where the archway had been, where he had stood, all those years ago. Time stopped. That's the only way I can describe it. The sound wasn't loud, not like a gunshot or a door slamming. It was small, intimate, the kind of sound you only hear when a house is supposed to be completely silent. A tired groan of old wood, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times growing up. But this was different. It had weight. It had purpose. It came from the exact spot. The threshold of the hallway, right where the archway used to be. Right where he had been standing in the video. My whole body went rigid. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. My ears strained, trying to separate the sound from the frantic thumping of my own heart. A drumbeat against my ribs that was so loud I was sure anything in the house could hear it. I stared at the dark opening of the hallway, a black rectangle leading to the rest of the house, to the bedrooms, to the bathroom, to the past. It was just a dark space, but now it felt like a mouth, waiting. Maybe it was just the house settling. That's what a normal person would think. Houses make noise, old houses especially. This place was nearly 50 years old. It had a whole symphony of creaks and groans. I'd lived with them my entire childhood, but my body wasn't listening to logic. The primitive part of my brain, the part that knows when a predator is near, was screaming. It wasn't the house settling. You can tell the difference. Settling is a random crack, a slow sigh of timber. This was the sound of pressure being applied and then released. A footstep, and then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, more defined, not a creak, but a soft scuff, like the sole of a shoe dragging for a fraction of a second against the worn hardwood floor. A sound of adjustment, a shifting of weight. That was it. The flimsy wall of denial I'd been trying to build in my head just collapsed into dust. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't pareidolia. The thing from the tapes, the watcher, my impossible twin, wasn't just in the past anymore. He was here. He had followed me out of the screen. A cold, electric panic shot up my spine and into my skull. My vision swam for a second. The living room, with its familiar floral sofa and dusty coffee table, suddenly felt alien and hostile. It wasn't my childhood home anymore. It was a hunting ground, and I was trapped inside it. Every shadow was a hiding place. Every doorway was an ambush point. The silence wasn't empty, it was listening. I had to move. Staying here, a frozen target in the dim glow of the TV, was the worst possible option. I slid backwards on the rug, my bare feet making no sound. My eyes were locked on the hallway opening. I felt like a mouse staring at the dark hole where it knows the snake is hiding. My mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a plan. Phone. Where was my phone? I'd left it charging in the kitchen. The kitchen. To get there, I'd have to move away from the hallway, put a little more distance between me and that sound. Good. That was a plan. A small, pathetic plan, but a plan nonetheless. I got to my feet in a low crouch, my knees shaking so badly I was afraid they'd buckle. I needed something, a weapon. My eyes darted around the room. A heavy glass ashtray from the 70s. A floor lamp that was too awkward to swing. Nothing. My gaze fell on the pass-through window to the kitchen. On the counter, next to a bowl of long-dead fruit, was the wooden knife block. I didn't even think. I half crawled, half scrambled the few feet to the opening and reached through. My hand fumbled, knocking against the block. The clatter of wood on formica sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, listening. Nothing. No reaction from the hallway. Just that same heavy, waiting silence. My fingers found the handle of a knife. I pulled it free. It was just a small paring knife, the one my mom always used for apples. The blade was barely 3 inches long. It felt ridiculous, a child's toy against an impossible threat. But holding the cool, smooth wood of the handle in my sweaty palm did something. It was real, it was solid, it gave me a single, sharp point of focus in a world that had dissolved into pure terror. Okay, deep breath, just get to the phone. Call 911, what would I even say? There's a man in my house who looks just like me and he's from an old home movie. They'd think I was crazy or high. I didn't care, I just needed to hear another human voice. I needed someone to know where I was. I took a step towards the kitchen, away from the living room and the hallway. My back was to the dark opening now, and every nerve ending screamed in protest. It felt like I had a target painted on me. I imagined him stepping out of the shadows, silent, and just standing there, watching me. I fought the urge to look back. Don't look back, just go. I made it to the kitchen doorway. The linoleum felt cold and slightly sticky under my feet. My phone was there, its screen dark, plugged into the wall by the toaster. I sidled along the counter, never taking my eyes off the entrance to the living room, the hallway just visible beyond it. The paring knife was held out in front of me, a useless little silver fang. I was almost there, just a few more feet. My brain was starting to fire a little more clearly. Get the phone, lock myself in the bathroom. The old lock was flimsy, but it was something. But then a new thought wormed its way in. What if he wasn't in the hallway anymore? What if, while I was getting the knife, he had moved? What if he was now somewhere else in the house? Upstairs? In one of the bedrooms? The sounds were from the hallway. I had to be sure. I had to know where he was. It's a stupid, primal instinct, the need to see the monster. You can't fight what you can't see. I abandoned the phone. I know, it was the dumbest decision of my life. But at that moment, the fear of the unknown was greater than the fear of the known. I had to check the hallway. I had to see for myself that it was empty. I crept back to the edge of the living room, my heart a frantic prisoner in my chest. The knife was gripped so tightly my knuckles were white. I peered around the corner. The hallway was still a dark, inscrutable slash. I could see the bottom of the staircase at the far end, disappearing into the upper floor's darkness. There was a light switch just inside the hall, on the left. If I could just reach it. I took a breath and darted forward, my hand slapping against the wall, searching for the switch. My fingers found the cool, familiar plastic toggle. I flipped it up. The hallway was instantly flooded with a harsh, yellow light from the single overhead fixture. My eyes squinted at the sudden brightness. It was empty, completely, utterly empty. The worn runner rug, the small table against the wall with the old rotary phone that hadn't worked in 20 years. The collection of framed family photos marching up the wall alongside the stairs. Nothing was out of place. There was no one there. No shadowy figure. No impossible twin. Just a hallway. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. My shoulders slumped, the tension in my arm eased, and the knife suddenly felt heavy and absurd. I let out a shaky breath that turned into a weak, pathetic laugh. Jesus Christ, I whispered to the empty space. You're losing it, Nate. You're really, actually losing your mind. Dust, an old house, an overactive imagination fueled by grief and loneliness. That's all it was. I had freaked myself out so badly that I was manufacturing sounds. Hearing footsteps that weren't there, I felt like an idiot. A paranoid, knife-wielding idiot standing in the middle of his parents' hallway at 10 o'clock at night. I turned off the light, plunging the hall back into comforting, normal darkness. I walked back into the living room, a foolish grin on my face. The fear was already receding, replaced by a profound sense of embarrassment. I was going to get my phone, go upstairs, get in my old bed, and sleep for 12 hours. No more tapes. First thing in the morning, I was throwing the whole damn box in the trash. I stepped back onto the rug in the living room, and I froze. Something was wrong. The room was different. It took my brain a second to catch up, to process the change. It was the silence. It was a different kind of silence than before. A deeper silence. The low, electronic hum of the television was gone. I looked at the TV set. The screen was black, not paused, not static. Off. The little red power light at the bottom was dark. My eyes shot to the VCR on the shelf below it. The green digital clock, which had been blinking 12 o'clock for 25 years, was also dark. The power light was out. The whole unit was dead. And sitting in the slot, pushed out from the machine's dark maw, was the tape. Beach Trip, Summer, '99. It lay there at a slight angle, a black plastic rectangle offered up by the dead machine. I just stood there, staring. My blood ran cold, all the brief, foolish relief I'd felt instantly evaporating, replaced by a new kind of dread that was 1,000 times worse. It was a cold, calm, certain dread. I hadn't touched the TV. I hadn't touched the VCR. I had been in the kitchen, in the hallway. I had been maybe 15, 20 feet away the whole time. You don't just lose power to a TV and a VCR. The lamp in the corner was still on. The circuit hadn't blown, and VCRs don't eject tapes when they lose power. They just stop. The tape stays inside. To get it out, you have to press the button. A physical button. Someone, or something, had to have pressed it. I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than bone, that I was not alone in the room. The thing from the tapes, the watcher, hadn't made a sound in the hallway because he wasn't in the hallway. While I was creeping around, playing ghost hunter with a fruit knife, he had been right here. In the living room with me. He had stood here, in the quiet, and when my back was turned, he had reached out a silent hand and pressed a button. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was something far more terrifying. It was a message, a simple, undeniable statement of fact. I am here, I can touch things, and you didn't even see me. I stood there for a second that felt like it stretched into a year. My brain just refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The ejected tape. The dead TV. It was such a small thing, such a quiet violation, but it was louder than any scream. It was a statement, a demonstration of power. The coldness that had been a trickle down my spine was now a flash flood, a full-body immersion in ice water. All the air left my lungs in a silent puff. He had been here, not in the hall, here, standing right behind me, probably. Maybe he was even looking over my shoulder as I stared at the door to the kitchen, clutching my stupid little apple knife. The thought made my stomach try to crawl up my throat. He had been close enough to touch the VCR. That meant he had been close enough to touch me. And I didn't even know. That was the worst part. The sheer, silent arrogance of it. It wasn't trying to hide. It was showing me that it didn't need to. It could move through my space, interact with my world, and I was completely blind to it. A message had been delivered, and its contents were simple. You are not safe. Not even in the light. My first instinct wasn't to run or scream. It was to become a statue. I was suddenly convinced that if I didn't move, if I didn't even breathe, it might not see me. A completely irrational, primal fear response. My back found the wall beside the living room entrance, the textured wallpaper a rough, grounding sensation against my shirt. I slid down it slightly, my knees weak. The paring knife was still in my hand, but my grip was so tight and sweaty that it felt slick, threatening to slip free. It felt less like a weapon and more like a child's security blanket. An utterly useless piece of metal and wood against whatever this was. The silence that followed was different. Before, it had been a waiting silence. Now, it was a knowing silence. A suffocating pressure that filled the entire house. It felt heavy. I could feel it in my ears, a low hum that was less a sound and more the absence of it. Every familiar object in the room, the faded family photos on the mantelpiece, the worn floral pattern on the sofa, the chipped ceramic lamp, looked menacing, like actors on a stage waiting for their cue. I had to get out. The thought finally broke through the paralysis. It was a single, clear beacon in a fog of terror. Get out of the house. Now, my eyes darted around, mapping a route. The front door was the only real option. It was at the other end of the hallway I had just cleared, the hallway where the footsteps had come from. The thought of running down that narrow corridor, with its closed bedroom doors on either side, was horrifying. It was a gauntlet, but the alternative, staying here in this room where it had just demonstrated its presence, was unthinkable. What about a window? No, Dad had painted most of them shut years ago, convinced it helped with insulation. The big one in the living room was probably the only one that opened, but it was right here, in the heart of the danger zone. I'd have to turn my back on the room to fumble with the old latches. No chance. So, the hallway it was. A straight shot to the front door. Phone. I needed my phone. Where was it? My brain scrambled to remember. The kitchen, on the counter, by the toaster. I'd walked right past it. I had been 2 feet away from a lifeline to the outside world, to the police, to another human voice, and I had abandoned it to go play ghost hunter in the hall. The stupidity of it, the sheer mortal stupidity of that choice, hit me with a fresh wave of nausea. To get the phone now meant turning right, deeper into the house, exposing my back to the hallway for an even longer period. I couldn't do it. There was no time. The escape was the only thing that mattered. The phone was a luxury I couldn't afford. The plan was simple and terrible. I would run. I would burst from this room, down that hallway, without looking back, and I wouldn't stop until I was across the street, banging on the Hendersons' door. I tried to take a deep, calming breath, but my lungs wouldn't cooperate. All I got was a shallow, shaky gasp. I shifted my weight, preparing my legs to push off the wall. My muscles were trembling, coiled springs of adrenaline and fear. This is it, I told myself. On 3, 1, 2, I had to look one more time. I don't know why. Maybe it was the same stupid instinct that made me check the hallway in the first place. The need to see the monster. To confirm it wasn't standing right in the open, waiting for me. My eyes swept across the room one last time, a frantic, desperate scan. The sofa, the coffee table, the fireplace, the large, ornate mirror hanging over the mantelpiece. My gaze locked onto the mirror. And the world ended. It wasn't a clean reflection. The mirror was old, the silvering beginning to part in tiny, dark specks. It reflected the room behind me, the armchair, the corner lamp casting a warm yellow circle on the hardwood floor, and the dark, yawning archway of the hallway. And for a fraction of a second, something moved in it. It wasn't a person, not really. In the reflection, standing just inside the dark archway of the hall behind me, was a shape. A human shape, but it was made of static. It was a shimmering, glitching silhouette, like the tracking on the VCR was failing. A ripple of visual noise that held the form of a man. It had no face, no features, just a constant, roiling distortion that my brain somehow recognized as the figure from the tapes. My impossible twin. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was seized by a cold, invisible fist and squeezed dry. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only watch, paralyzed, as this tear in reality, this human-shaped hole in the reflection, glided. It didn't walk. It moved with a liquid smoothness that was completely wrong, drifting from the edge of the hallway archway across the empty space behind my reflected self. It passed behind me in the mirror, a silent, buzzing phantom. And then it was gone, moving out of the mirror's frame, into the part of the living room I couldn't see. I saw it. I saw it as clearly as I saw my own terrified face in that glass. But I felt nothing. There was no breeze as it passed behind me. No change in temperature. No sound. My senses in the real world were reporting that there was nothing there. But the mirror, that lying, truth-telling piece of glass, screamed otherwise. The connection finally snapped. The fear erupted. It wasn't a slow build anymore, it was an explosion. A single, silent scream was trapped in my throat, a pressure that made my vision swim with black spots. I spun around. The movement was pure animal instinct, a clumsy, desperate whirl. I brought the paring knife up in a shaking fist, pointing it at the space where the thing in the mirror should have been. Nothing. The living room was exactly as it was a moment ago. Empty, quiet, still. The corner where it should have been standing was just a corner, filled with shadows cast by the floor lamp. There was no static man, no glitching phantom. I stood there, panting, my whole body shaking violently now, the adrenaline completely out of control. My eyes darted back and forth between the empty corner and the lying mirror. The mirror showed only me now, a pale, wide-eyed man holding a tiny knife, looking insane. But I knew, the relief I'd felt in the hallway earlier was a sick joke compared to the certainty that now gripped me. I wasn't losing my mind. I hadn't imagined it. The thing from the tapes, the thing that had ejected the video, the thing in the mirror, it was real. And it wasn't in the mirror anymore. It had stepped out of the reflection. It was here, in the room with me, hiding in plain sight, in the shadows, in the corner of my eye. My gaze snapped back to the hallway, the dark, gaping maw that led to the front door, the escape route. An icy realization washed over me. It wasn't standing in the living room corner anymore. I knew where it was. When it glided out of the mirror's frame, it hadn't stopped in the living room. It had kept going. It had returned to the place it had been standing in the videotape. To the place the footsteps had come from. To the place I had to run through to survive. It was in the hallway, standing in the darkness, waiting for me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet were nailed to the floorboards, my body locked in place by a kind of terror so absolute it went past screaming and landed somewhere in the realm of silent system failure. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It wasn't a phantom. It was in the hallway. Right there, in the pitch-black archway that led to the front door. My only way out. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a theory. I knew it with the same certainty that I knew my own name. It was there, standing, waiting. It was a checkmate I hadn't even seen coming. My breath came in tiny, useless little sips, not enough to fill my lungs, just enough to keep the black spots from taking over my vision completely. The paring knife in my hand was a joke. It felt like a toothpick. What was I going to do? Stab a ghost? A glitch in reality? I might as well have been holding a feather. The silence in the house was a physical weight now. It pressed in on my eardrums. It felt like the moment before a lightning strike, when the air itself gets thick and smells of ozone. Every part of me, every primal instinct inherited from a million years of ancestors, was screaming one single, crystal-clear word. Pray. That's what I was, a mouse frozen in the middle of the kitchen floor while the shadow of the hawk passes over. So that was it. I was going to die here, in my childhood living room, killed by a thing that looked like me. The thought was so bizarre, so completely insane, that for a split second, a bubble of hysterical laughter tried to climb up my throat. I swallowed it down. It tasted like bile. Then, it moved. It wasn't a sudden lunge. It was slow, deliberate, a single shape detaching itself from the absolute black of the hallway. It was like watching a hole in the universe take a step forward into the dim light of the living room. It stopped right at the threshold, framed perfectly by the archway. Just like in the video. And I saw it. I saw him. The director's notes were right. It was a work of art. It was me, not a vague resemblance, not a long-lost twin. It was me, same faded blue jeans I was wearing, same gray Henley shirt, a little worn at the collar, same tired lines around the eyes from a week of packing and emotional exhaustion. Same haircut I'd gotten 2 weeks ago. It was a perfect, one-to-one copy. Except it wasn't. Around its entire body, there was a shimmer. A subtle, constant distortion, like the heat haze off summer asphalt, but it wasn't heat. It was visual noise. It was the fuzz and rolling lines of a damaged VHS tape, a constant, roiling static that clung to its form like a shroud. Its edges were indistinct, bleeding into the air around it. When it moved its head slightly, the motion wasn't smooth. It stuttered just for a microsecond with a faint trail of afterimage, like a frame rate struggling to keep up with reality. I was looking at a living, breathing video error. But the worst part was the face. My face. It was completely, utterly blank. There was nothing behind the eyes. No anger, no malice, no thought that I could recognize. It was the same look I had seen on the tape, a flat, vacant stare. The look of a mannequin. The look of something that was only pretending to be human, and wasn't even trying very hard. It was just looking at me, witnessing me. Its gaze felt like it was pinning me to the wall. Time just stretched. A second became a minute. A minute became an eternity. We just stood there, the real me and the static copy, locked in this impossible standoff. My mind was scrambling, trying to find a box to put this in. A psychotic break, a hallucination brought on by stress and grief. But I knew this was real. The cold in the room was real. The pressure in my ears was real. The slight, almost inaudible hum of static that seemed to be coming from it was real. Then, it did something that shattered the last piece of my sanity. It smiled. It wasn't a real smile. The corners of its mouth just pulled back. Slowly, a mechanical, joyless motion that didn't reach its empty eyes. It was the smile of a predator that knows the chase is over. It was a smile of pure, detached ownership. It was the most horrible thing I have ever seen in my life. The smile said, "I see you. I've always seen you, and now, I'm here." And then it lifted its foot. The motion was slow, deliberate, and completely silent. No buzz, no crackle. Just the impossible sight of this video glitch man lifting a jean-clad leg and placing it down on the hardwood floor of the living room. One step over the threshold. One step into my space. That's when the circuit breaker in my brain finally blew. All thought just ended. All attempts at reason, at understanding, just vanished, consumed by a volcanic eruption of pure, animal terror. There was no plan. There was no strategy. There was only the biological imperative to not be there when it took its next step. A sound ripped out of my throat. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a scream. It was a raw, guttural noise of an animal caught in a trap. My eyes darted around the room in a blind panic, not looking for a weapon, but for an action. For a thing to do that wasn't just standing here waiting to be unmade. My eyes landed on the solid oak armchair my dad used to love, sitting a few feet away. My hands were on it before I even knew I was moving. The wood was heavy, solid, real. My fingers dug into the armrests. I didn't lift it with my arms. I heaved it with my entire body, a single, convulsive surge of adrenaline. The thing in the doorway hadn't moved. It was still standing there, 1 foot forward, with that dead, horrifying smile plastered on its face, watching me with a kind of mild curiosity. With another ragged, inhuman roar, I swung the chair. It wasn't aimed. It was just away. Away from it. It arced through the air and smashed, with an explosive, deafening crash, into the large picture window that looked out onto the front lawn. The sound was apocalyptic, a gunshot crack of splintering wood followed by the musical, terrifying symphony of a massive pane of glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. For a heartbeat, the world was just the sound of falling glass, like a violent, crystalline rainstorm. And in that heartbeat, there was a way out. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the glass still clinging to the frame like jagged teeth. I didn't think about the fall. I just ran. I took 3 clumsy, desperate strides across the living room carpet and launched myself headfirst through the empty, shattered frame of the window. The pain was immediate and abstract. I felt sharp, tearing sensations along my left arm and my side as shards of glass raked across my skin. It was a distant fact, like reading a weather report. The data was there, you are being cut, but the emotional response, the pain, was completely disconnected, lost in the white-hot static of my terror. I hit the overgrown bushes under the window with a hard thud, branches scratching at my face, and then tumbled out onto the damp, cool grass of the front lawn. My lungs burned. I was gasping, choking on the night air. The smell of cut grass and wet earth was so profoundly normal it was dizzying. For a moment I just lay there, a heap on the ground, my body screaming at me from a dozen new places. Then the thought hit me, it's still in there. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell over again. Blood was running freely down my arm, a warm, slick feeling against my skin. I could feel a deeper, throbbing ache in my side. I didn't care. I just ran, stumbling, weaving, my bare feet slapping against the cold, wet pavement of the driveway. I ran for the lights. The Hendersons' house, next door. Their porch light was on, a warm, yellow beacon of sanity in the suffocating darkness. I crossed their lawn in a few desperate bounds and threw myself against their front door, my bloody hands slapping and pounding against the wood. Help! The word tore from my raw throat. Please, help me. Someone, help. I was sobbing now, great, heaving, tearless sobs that shook my whole body. I hammered on the door again and again, my fist making a frantic, wild rhythm. He's in my house. Please, call the police. Help. An eternity passed in a few seconds. Then, finally, a light flicked on inside. I heard the muffled sound of a voice, Mr. Henderson's. Just before the deadbolt clicked, I risked one last look back at my house. It was dark, silent. It looked exactly as it always had, a peaceful little suburban home nestled under the oak trees. Except for the window. The living room window was a gaping, black mouth, a jagged wound in the face of my childhood. And from its darkness, I felt a stare. I couldn't see anything, but I knew with a certainty that chilled the blood in my veins, that it was standing there, just inside the broken frame, watching me. Still smiling. The deadbolt clicked, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through my own ragged gasping. Then the door opened a crack, a chain still holding it fast. And I, wide and surrounded by a web of familiar wrinkles, peered out. It was Martha Henderson, Mrs. Henderson. She'd given me cookies when I was 6 and yelled at me for riding my bike on her lawn when I was 10. "Nom? Good Lord, is that you?" Her voice was a shaky whisper. I couldn't form a sentence. I just leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my bloody palm leaving a messy print next to her peephole. "Please," I choked out. "House, he's in my house. Call 911. The eye vanished. I heard the chain rattle as she fumbled with it, her hands clumsy with age and panic. The door swung open. She was standing there in a pink floral nightgown, her face a mask of absolute horror as she took in the sight of me. The blood, the dirt, the wild terror in my eyes. To her, I must have looked like a monster myself. "Oh, my heavens, Nom," she stammered, grabbing my uninjured arm and pulling me inside, away from the night. The warmth of her house, the smell of potpourri and old furniture, was so jarringly normal it almost made me sick. She slammed the door and locked it behind us. "Stay right there, don't move." I collapsed onto her entryway rug while she hurried away, her bare feet pattering on the linoleum. I heard her voice, thin and reedy, talking to an operator. The words were a jumble. "My neighbor, Nom, he's covered in blood. Someone's in his house. Yes, 121 Oak Street. Please hurry." I just sat there, shivering, my back against her front door. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and the pain was beginning to register. A deep, throbbing ache in my side. A dozen stinging cuts on my arm and hand. The world was coming back into focus, and I wished it wouldn't. Every shadow in Mrs. Henderson's tidy little foyer seemed to move, to warp, to take on a familiar, static-shrouded shape. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could still see it smile. That dead, mechanical pulling of the lips. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 5 minutes before I heard the sirens. A distant wail at first, growing steadily closer until it was a piercing scream that filled the quiet suburban street. Red and blue lights pulsed through Mrs. Henderson's curtains, painting the walls in frantic, strobing colors. A firm knock came at the door. "Police department." Mrs. Henderson hurried to open it. 2 officers stood on her porch, flashlights cutting beams through the darkness. Behind them, an ambulance was pulling up to the curb in front of my house. My house. The one with the gaping, black wound where the living room window used to be. The next half hour was a blur of methodical chaos. One of the paramedics, a young woman with a calm, bored face, was dabbing at my cuts with antiseptic wipes that stung like fire. She wrapped my arm in a bandage and put a large square of gauze over the gash in my side. "You're lucky," she said, her voice flat. "Looks like you avoided the worst of it. Still, you'll need stitches for this one." I just nodded, a blanket draped over my shoulders. I was sitting on the back bumper of the ambulance, the doors open. The 2 cops were trying to get a statement. One was younger, crew cut, all business. The other was older, maybe late 50s, with a tired face and a thick mustache. He seemed to be in charge. "So, tell us again, son," the older one said, his voice patient. "You were in the house, and you saw an intruder?" "Yes," I said, my own voice hoarse. "He was in the hallway. He looked just like me." The 2 cops exchanged a look. I saw it. The "we've got a live one" look. The "drunk or high" look. Just like you? The younger one asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Exactly like me. Same clothes, same everything. But he was wrong. He was like static. From an old TV. I knew how it sounded. I knew I sounded insane. My mind was scrambling for a rational explanation I could feed them, something that made sense. I don't know, maybe it was a mask. A really, really good mask. And some kind of projector? I don't know. The older cop, whose name tag read Miller, just nodded slowly. And he didn't say anything? He smiled, I whispered, and a fresh wave of cold washed over me. Then he came at me. So you threw a chair through the window and jumped out, Miller finished. Yes. He sighed, a long, weary sound. Okay, Nom, you just sit tight here with the paramedics. My partner and I are going to do a full sweep of the house. We'll be right back. I watched them walk across the lawn, their flashlights playing over the dew-damp grass. They disappeared through my front door, which was still standing wide open. I sat there, listening to the crackle of the police radio and the quiet hum of the ambulance. Mrs. Henderson was hovering a few feet away, wringing her hands. The whole street was awake now, lights on in every house, neighbors peeking through their blinds at the free weeknight drama. It felt like forever. I found myself staring at the broken window of my living room. From this distance it was just a black, empty square. A void, but I knew what was in there. I knew he was in there. Or it, the thing. I was waiting for the gunshots. For a shout, for something, but there was nothing, just silence. After what felt like a lifetime, the porch light of my house flicked on. A few moments later, Officer Miller and his partner walked back out. They weren't running, they weren't shouting, their posture was relaxed. They walked back across the lawn toward me. My heart sank. Miller stopped in front of me. His face wasn't scared, it wasn't panicked, it was puzzled. He had a strange, conflicted look in his eyes. Well, son, he said, taking off his cap and running a hand through his graying hair. The house is completely empty. We checked everywhere, attic, basement, every closet. There's nobody in there. No, I said, shaking my head. No, he was right there. He was in the hallway. There's no sign of a forced entry, either, the younger cop added, clicking his pen. Front and back doors were unlocked, but nothing's disturbed. Except for, the living room. Maybe he ran out the back when he heard the sirens, I said, my voice pleading. But I knew he hadn't. Miller looked at me, then at my house, then back at me. Maybe, but we didn't find anyone in the yard, and the neighbors didn't see anyone leave. He hesitated, and this was the moment the air changed, the moment the regular, procedural world ended and something else began. He seemed to be choosing his next words very carefully. Thing is, he started, his voice dropping a little lower. We found that VHS tape you were talking about. Nom's 5th birthday. I stared at him, my blood running cold. It was in the VCR, I said. On the floor. Yeah, it was still in the machine, Miller confirmed. We figured, what the hell? We rewound it a bit, played it. Just to see what you were seeing. He was quiet for a long moment. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. He was looking at the bandage on my arm. The weird thing is, he said, finally looking up. His brow was furrowed in genuine confusion. We watched it. We didn't see anyone in the doorway, son. There's no man standing there. My entire world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the street, the radio, Mrs. Henderson's worried muttering, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. What, was all I could manage to say. There's no one there, he repeated, more firmly this time, as if trying to convince himself as much as me. The video is just what you'd expect. A bunch of kids, a cake, presents. It's normal, except for the end of the clip we saw. He leaned in a little closer. The younger cop was just staring at me now, his notepad forgotten. Right after the kids sing Happy Birthday, Miller said, his voice almost a whisper. The little boy, I guess, you blow out the candles. And then you just stop. You turn your head and you just stare. Straight at the hallway archway. He paused, a shiver seeming to run through his own body. And there's nothing there, Nom. The doorway is empty, but the look on your face. Holy God, the kid just stares at that empty space with this look of absolute, abject terror. Like he's seen a ghost. He doesn't move, doesn't blink, he just stares for almost a full minute. Then the tape cuts to static. I didn't hear anything else he said. His words were just sounds. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were slamming into place, building a structure of horror so complete, so perfect, that it left no room for error. It only shows itself to its victim. The chill started in my feet and worked its way up, a paralyzing, cryogenic freeze. The little boy, me, 5 years old, surrounded by friends and family, a paper party hat on my head. I had stopped. I had stared. I remembered it now, a memory buried under 25 years of dust. A sudden cold spot in the room. A feeling of being watched. Everyone thought I was just tired. Sugar crash. But I wasn't tired. I was terrified, because I had seen him. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a long-lost uncle. Standing in that doorway, shimmering with a faint, staticky haze that no one else could see, was a man. A grown man with tired eyes and cuts on his arm and a deep, soul-crushing fear on his face. A man wearing the same faded blue jeans and gray Henley shirt I was wearing right now, sitting on the back of this ambulance. 5-year-old Nam hadn't seen a monster. He had seen me. I looked up from the pavement, past Officer Miller's confused face, and toward my house. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a monument, a tombstone. The loop was closed. The flicker on the tape, the thing I had summoned, the terror from my past, it had a face. And it was my own. I had run from myself. I had created the very ghost that haunted me. I was the prey, cowering in the night. And I was the monster in the doorway. I always had been, and the most terrifying part was the quiet, certain knowledge, settling in my gut like a block of ice, that someday, somewhere in the future, a version of me was waiting. Not to attack, but to stand in a doorway with a joyless, mechanical smile, and watch the next part of the story unfold. To make sure the loop was never, ever broken.